Jon Snow knelt in the quiet yard of Castle Black, sweat beading along his brow as he finished his sword drill. His breath misted in the cold air, and each exhalation formed a fleeting cloud that vanished against the unyielding vastness of the northern sky. Ghost lay a short distance away, the direwolf's red eyes tracking his every move. The training yard was empty this late in the day, save for the dark granite walls and the twisted columns of ice that never seemed to melt. Jon had come here to clear his mind, to hone himself on the whetstone of discipline. Everything within him knew that once he rose, once he left the yard, he would cross a threshold from which there was no return. He had a secret letter tucked in the pocket of his cloak, a letter that had arrived the day before, carried by one of Maester Aemon's ravens, sealed in wax, marked with the sigil of House Stark. The seal had shown a wolf's head pressed into silver wax, but inside the parchment was no message from Robb, Sansa, Arya, or any other sibling. Instead, it was a letter from Howland Reed, Lord of the Crannogmen, a man known for cunning and fierce loyalty to Eddard Stark. In it, Jon read words that shattered the foundation of his entire life. Ned Stark was not his father. Instead, the letter claimed, explaining in painstaking, measured detail, that Jon Snow was the son of Lyanna Stark and Robert Baratheon, conceived in secret before Robert's rebellion. According to Reed, the young lovers had hidden their brief liaison when war clouds were gathering over the Seven Kingdoms. With Lyanna's death at the Tower of Joy and Robert enthroned in King's Landing, Lord Eddard had kept that truth from everyone. He spun the tale of Jon being his own bastard to protect him, ensuring that the boy would never be used as a political pawn or threatened by Robert's temper or Cersei's manipulations. But Robert, ironically, had never known Jon even existed. The child of his beloved Lyanna had grown up believing himself a Stark bastard, with none the wiser, save for Ned and Howland Reed. Jon had read the letter again and again, until the words seemed burned inside his eyes. He had thought he might vomit the first time. Every memory of Winterfell was cast under a new, chilling light. He recalled the glimpses of sorrow in Ned's eyes, the guilt he saw sometimes when the man regarded him. That was the cost Eddard Stark paid to keep Jon safe. He had endured a tarnish on his own honor, letting the realm whisper of his broken vows, his weakness for some unknown woman. Even Catelyn Stark had grown cold and hostile, believing her husband had betrayed her, all to keep Jon's existence hidden. In normal circumstances, that secret might have died with Lord Eddard, but the circumstances were no longer normal. War ravaged the Seven Kingdoms, and the Lannisters held the Iron Throne with Joffrey at the helm. The rumors of Joffrey's parentage, that he was no true Baratheon, had reached even Castle Black. If Joffrey were truly the product of incest between Cersei and Jaime Lannister, he had no legitimate claim to the throne. That left Stannis Baratheon as Robert's oldest brother, or Renly, or even some rumored bastards like Gendry. But the realm's rightful claim might well belong to Jon, if one accepted that he was indeed the legitimate child of Robert and Lyanna, married in secret, as Reed's letter suggested. The notion struck Jon like a thunderclap. The letter said they had wed under the old gods near the Isle of Faces, in haste and with few witnesses, Ned and Howland among them. But the vows had been spoken, and a child born of that union had a stronger claim than any of Robert's siblings. The letter urged Jon to leave the Night's Watch quietly, to forsake an oath made under false pretenses. Maester Aemon, after reading the letter, had looked on Jon with profound sorrow, for only Aemon truly understood the bitter weight of the crown. Jon had expected his advice to be a condemnation, an urging to remain loyal to the Watch, but the old Maester had done nothing of the sort. Instead, Aemon had said, "If the realm is drowning in blood, and only a rightful king can help heal its wounds, what is one man's vow compared to the lives of thousands?" Now, in the stillness of the yard, Jon realized his pulse thundered in his chest. This was no easy matter. For centuries, the Night's Watch had demanded an unbreakable oath. Each brother renounced all claims, forswore any ties that might lead him away from the Wall. But these were not ordinary times. The realm fractured, and the White Walkers had stirred in the lands beyond. If the realm was devoured by the chaos of Lannister rule, how would the men of the Seven Kingdoms ever rally to face the coming darkness? Jon wiped sweat from his forehead. Ghost rose to his feet, sensing the shift in his master's mood. "Come, boy," Jon said softly, though his throat felt as if it clenched around each word. "We have a new road ahead." He left the yard, climbed the steep steps up to Maester Aemon's chambers, and told him it was time. They had already spoken the night before. The old man had said he would arrange Jon's departure. Dawn was near, and if they timed it right, only a few of the watch would even see him leave. Maester Aemon's room was warm from the small brazier in the corner. The elderly Targaryen sat at a desk, his white eyes milky, yet his face holding a serene composure. He lifted his head when Jon entered, as if he felt the stirring of the cold air. "Have you come to a decision, Jon?" he asked. His voice was a whisper of wind in old timbers, but it held a gentle, unwavering clarity. Jon closed the door quietly. "I have. You know what that means for me. For my vows." Aemon's cataract-shrouded eyes seemed to pierce through the gloom. "Yes, I do." He inhaled a trembling breath. "I will not say whether your vow is undone or not. You must determine that. But I will say that if you are the rightful heir to the throne, or if you believe so, then you cannot remain here while the realm is in flames." Jon thought of Sam, of Pyp and Gren, of the Old Bear, Lord Commander Mormont, and all the others he had fought beside. Honor demanded he stay and defend them from the terrors beyond the wall. And yet the letter weighed heavier than chain mail, and the memory of Ned Stark's final days in King's Landing haunted him still. Ned had died by Joffrey's command. The Lannisters meant to extinguish all traces of House Stark, of anything that threatened their hold. And if Reed's letter was true, then Jon alone had the rightful name to topple the abomination on the Iron Throne. Slowly, Jon knelt at Maester Aemon's side, took his wrinkled, trembling hand, and pressed it to his forehead. "Thank you for everything," Jon said, his voice raw. If the gods are good, I will return to help defend the wall. Or I will send help, once the war is settled." Aemon's hand tightened around his. "The gods are rarely kind, Jon, but you must do what you believe is right. This is the burden of kings, and perhaps it has found you, whether you wanted it or not." Jon squeezed back, letting a moment of silence pass between them, the hush thick with unspoken emotion. Then he rose and gathered his cloak and sword, checking the satchel Maester Aemon had prepared. Provisions, some coins, and, most importantly, the letter from Howland Reed. Jon had burned the original to keep it from prying eyes, but he carried a copy in a waterproof pouch. That evidence, and the testimonies of a few who still lived, might be all he had to prove a claim. They moved swiftly, for the dawn was an hour away. Outside the chamber, Sam waited, his round face lined with worry. "You're sure, Jon?" Sam asked in a trembling voice. "I mean, I know you're sure, but Jon smiled, though it felt brittle. "I am sure. Thank you for your friendship, Sam. Take care of yourself. And of the watch." Sam's eyes were shining, but he only nodded. "I'll do what I can. And you be careful out there. The realm is a dangerous place, especially now." Jon slung the satchel over his shoulder. Ghost padded beside him, silent, tail swishing. "Yes," Jon said. "I'll be careful." He rested a hand briefly on Sam's shoulder, then descended the narrow staircase that led to a side gate. In minutes, he would depart Castle Black. He thought of Mormont, of the man's leadership, but Aemon had assured Jon that the Lord Commander was, in his own way, a man of reason. The Old Bear might well see the value in Jon's departure. He might even have guessed that something momentous was afoot. At the small gate, two black brothers stood watch. Aemon had prepared them. They were men Jon trusted not to question him. They let him pass, raising torches to illuminate a patch of darkness as he and Ghost slipped through, his boots crunching over frozen gravel. Outside, the world smelled of pine and frost and the open wind that swept down from the far north. Jon felt a strange hollowness in his chest. Even with all the uncertainties, leaving the wall felt like exiling himself from the only sense of purpose he had known in years. But he went on. He would ride south, gather allies, present the truth, and see if the realm would accept his claim as Robert Baratheon's son. It might mean starting a war with the Lannisters or joining the war that already raged. The only question was, would enough lords rally behind him to dethrone Joffrey? Jon tightened the cloak around him. If he truly had Robert's blood in his veins, then let him do what Robert once did. Let him gather a loyal host, strike down the enemies of the crown, and restore order. Yet for all the valorous ring of that notion, it felt more like a waking nightmare. Jon had never sought to be king. He had wanted only a place to belong. Now, if the gods willed it, he would belong to the entire realm. And it would be no easy belonging. He made his way to the small stable outside the gate. Just a lean-to, really, where a horse waited, saddled and laden with supplies. The beast was a dappled gray mare with calm eyes, borrowed from the night's watch. Jon patted her flank, mounted, and urged her southward. Ghost loped behind in a graceful trot. They made their way through the gloom as the horizon lightened, the stars fading into the steel-gray sky. Jon dared not look back. His journey was long and bitterly cold at first. He wore the thick black cloak with the hood pulled low over his brow. The King's Road stretched before him, winding south through forests of pine, birch and oak. The man who had left the wall was not the same boy who had once yearned to be Ned Stark's son. He was something else now, some balance between the quiet, reflective watchers of the north and the fiery, tempestuous blood of a Baratheon. Perhaps that combination would give him the strength to do what must be done. So he pressed on, day after day, seeking the first place where he might find an ally who believed him, the holdfast of Howland Reed in the swamps of the Neck. As he rode through the foothills that approached Moat Cailin, the broken ruin that guarded the passage from the south into the north, Jon felt an uneasy stirring in his belly. The realm was at war, and the signs were everywhere. Burned farmsteads, abandoned huts, fields left untended. He kept his sword close, scanning for roving bands of outlaws or Lannister scouts. In the distance, vultures circled a distant battlefield. He urged his mare onward, hearing only the soft clop of hooves and the whisper of ghosts padding feet. When he came upon the edges of the bogs that led into the Neck, Jon found the path half submerged in dark water. Reeds and cattails jutted up from the murk. Mosquitoes danced in the humid air, despite the lingering northern chill. He dismounted to lead the mare carefully along the causeway, each step threatening to sink into mud. Ghost navigated nimbly, but the horse snorted and tossed her head in complaint. Gray clouds pressed low, threatening rain. At last, as dusk drew close, a trio of crannogmen emerged quietly from behind a screen of reeds. They wore boiled leather and carried short spears, each man's face painted in stripes of green and brown. One of them lifted a hand in silent greeting, as if expecting him. "You've come from the wall, Black Brother," the man said, though he eyed Jon's cloak suspiciously. "Or so we might guess by the cut of your black garb." Jon inclined his head. "I seek Howland Reed. I carry a letter from him. He asked for my coming." The mention of their lord's name and the letter seemed enough. They exchanged glances, and one whistled softly, a high, warbling note. A soft rustle of movement came from behind them, more hidden figures armed with bows. "Follow us," one of the crannogmen said. "We'll take you to Greywater Watch." Jon trailed them, leading the mare with Ghost at his side. They wound along a path only the crannogmen could perceive, twisting around sinkholes and half-hidden rivulets, crossing small wooden bridges so mossy they vanished into the swamp. Dusk fell, and the entire bog filled with the music of frogs and night insects. Torches flared in the hands of the watchers ahead, and then Jon saw a structure rising from the gloom, perched on a wide island. Walls of wood and stone, half obscured by vines, made up Greywater Watch, seat of House Reed. They led him inside, through a gate of heavy logs. The courtyard was packed earth, damp with the swamp's moisture. Small huts clung to the interior walls, and a squat hall loomed in the center. Crannogmen eyed Jon from the doorways, children peering out wide-eyed before being ushered away by their mothers. "Come," said one guide. "Lord Reed awaits." Jon stepped into the hall, leaving his mare and Ghost behind for the moment, though Ghost whined once. The direwolf's presence made the crannogmen uneasy, but none challenged Jon about it. The hall itself was dim, lit by a single brazier, the walls hung with tanned hides. At the far end, seated at a long table where maps and scrolls lay strewn, was a slight man with a narrow face, hair shot through with silver at the temples. He rose when Jon approached. "Lord Snow," said Howland Reed quietly. "You've come at last." Jon could only stare for a moment. He recalled fleeting memories, men telling stories of the quiet Crannog lord who had befriended Ned Stark. Reed was so slight of build that a single gust of wind might have carried him away, yet there was an intensity in his hazel eyes that spoke of hidden steel. "My lord," Jon said, remembering his courtesies, "I received your letter. And you read it, I trust? It changed everything." Jon took a breath that felt too shallow. "Is it all true?" Reed regarded him with a solemnity that felt ancient. "Yes, every word. You are the son of Lyanna Stark and Robert Baratheon. She asked Ned to protect you, to keep you from Robert's knowledge, so that you could not be used to manipulate him or turned into a target by the Lannisters. Ned believed the realm would be safer if your identity remained hidden. He also feared Robert's hatred of Targaryens might extend to you. Had he learned that Lyanna once was promised to Rhaegar, and there was confusion about timelines. It was complicated. But I was there on the Isle of Faces when they wed in secret. I saw the way Lyanna and Robert looked at each other, just days before the rebellion began in earnest. She discovered she was with child soon after. And then, well," he trailed off, his expression pained. "We all know how that war ended." Jon stood in silence, letting Reed's words press upon him. The swirl of conflicting histories had always been a point of confusion. Some in the realm believed Rhaegar had absconded with Lyanna, that he had fathered a child, but that was all overshadowed by the official story of how Robert's rebellion began. "You are sure?" Jon said, forcing the words past the dryness in his mouth. "Absolutely certain. I would stake my life on it," said Reed. "This is the truth Ned Stark carried to his grave. He died to keep you safe, in part. The time has come for you to decide whether to use that truth. The realm suffers under Joffrey's rule, and he is no Baratheon. If you claim the Baratheon name, perhaps the lords of the realm will remember Robert's bravery, combined with Ned's sense of honor, and follow you." Jon felt a pang at the mention of Ned. He remembered a father's stern kindness, the silent acceptance, the sense of belonging that now felt half a lie. Yet even so, Ned had truly loved him, that much was certain. It was not fatherhood by blood, but fatherhood in deed, and Jon would honor that. "Then," he said softly, "my next question, how do we proceed?" Howland Reed motioned for Jon to sit at the table. He poured them each a cup of bogwater wine, a strong, spiced beverage that smelled of cinnamon and mint. Jon took a sip. Its warmth spread through him. Reed unrolled a parchment, revealing a rough map of the north and the Riverlands. "Robb Stark is fighting the Lannisters," Reed said. "He holds the loyalty of many northern and river lords. Renly Baratheon is dead, last I heard, killed by some strange sorcery. Stannis Baratheon has declared himself the rightful king, but the Stormlord's loyalty to him has always been uncertain, and some have bent the knee to Joffrey out of fear. Meanwhile, the Tyrells have allied with kings landing in exchange for marrying Margaery Tyrell to Joffrey." Jon grimaced. It was far more complicated than just stepping forward and declaring himself. "Would Robb even welcome my claim? If I am Robert's son, that means I am not Ned's bastard, but I am still a half-Stark, I suppose." "Your mother was Lyanna Stark, Ned's beloved sister," Reed said. "That tie might give Robb reason to stand by you, for House Stark and House Baratheon were once close allies. But be cautious, Robb has declared himself king in the north, seeking northern independence. If you place yourself on the Iron Throne, that might conflict with the North's new sense of sovereignty." Jon nodded, considering. Is there a path to unify the realm once more, while also respecting the North's desire? Or perhaps Robb would relinquish that claim if he saw I was not some Lannister tyrant. "It is possible," We must find him first, or at least contact him. Yet be aware, Robb Stark is your cousin, though he does not know it. He likely thinks you are still just his half-brother by Ned's rumored indiscretion. We must present him the truth carefully. Jon's thoughts spun with 1,000 possibilities. He recalled the letter's final lines, which had urged him to find Reed and then muster a host. "You are the only living man who witnessed their secret wedding," Jon said. "Aside from possibly the High Septon who officiated, though the letter said that man died mysteriously soon after. Will your word be enough?" "Perhaps not by itself," said Reed. "But I possess the marriage documents. Lyanna kept them hidden, sealed away. Ned entrusted them to me for safekeeping. They bear the seal of the old gods and Robert's own signature. I can't speak to whether the realm will accept it, but it is powerful evidence indeed." Jon exhaled, the tension in his chest easing a fraction. "Then we have enough to start. But how do we rally the lords?" "We must persuade them that you can dethrone Joffrey and keep them safe from Lannister retribution," Reed said quietly. "You must also demonstrate that you are not a green boy with no experience in war or politics. You have Ned Stark's training, you have led men at the wall, you have fought wildlings and faced danger. Show them that, and we will call upon old ties. The North might be convinced. The Stormlands, if they learn Robert left a trueborn son, they may rise in your name." Jon looked at a flickering brazier. He pictured the black-haired, broad-shouldered figure of Robert Baratheon as people described him in his youth, full of boisterous laughter and unstoppable force. Was any of that in Jon's blood, or had it been overshadowed by Ned Stark's quiet sense of duty? He would find out soon enough. "I will not pretend to be something I'm not," he said. "I'm not here to rule by fear. If the lords follow me, it must be because they believe it's right." Reed nodded with satisfaction. "Then let us plan. Tomorrow I will show you the documents. We shall gather men, and you will decide if we march to the Twins, or if we head to Riverrun, or even to Robb's host." That night, Jon barely slept. Visions haunted him. The Iron Throne, made of twisted swords, looming in a hall thick with shadows. Joffrey stood upon it, smirking while chaos reigned. Then Ned's face appeared, silently imploring Jon to do what must be done. And in the distance, the roars of battle thundered. When dawn came, he rose feeling older, more weighed down by destiny than he could have imagined. He spent a fortnight at Greywater Watch, learning from Howland Reed, examining the parchment that bore Robert and Lyanna's signatures beneath a careful inscription. The words were faded from damp and time, but visible enough. A clandestine wedding vow, done in hush to avoid the wrath of Aerys Targaryen, should he discover Robert had wed the woman once promised to the Targaryen prince. The date was short days after Rhaegar allegedly spirited Lyanna away, but the truth seemed to be that she had fled to meet Robert in secret, uncertain about her forced betrothal, swayed by her love for Robert. The timeline was as tangled as the bogs of the neck, but the evidence was there. Reed arranged for ravens to be sent, careful, coded messages, urging certain lords loyal to Ned Stark to gather discreetly at Moat Cailin. The place was half ruined, but it was still the gateway to the north. In a fortnight more, a ragged company of northern bannermen had assembled. Lords of lesser houses, a few hundred fighting men. They had come out of loyalty to Ned and curiosity about this rumored secret. Some had known Jon as the bastard at Winterfell. Others had never laid eyes on him. Jon felt their stares, some sympathetic, some skeptical. When he stood before them, he had no illusions. He wore no crown, no finery, just a leather jerkin, the Stark sword at his hip. Ghost stood at his side, silent as always, an uncanny symbol of House Stark. "You know me as Jon Snow," he said, voice echoing off the old stone ruins. "But I am the son of Lyanna Stark and Robert Baratheon, born under a secret union. This letter from Lord Howland Reed can prove it. My mother died giving birth to me, and Lord Eddard Stark claimed me as his own bastard to protect me from those who would have used me as a pawn or killed me outright. All I ask is that you hear Lord Reed's words and see the evidence for yourselves. Judge then if I am worthy of your loyalty." He stepped back. Reed came forward, a small figure in leathers. He spoke softly, but somehow his voice carried in the hush of the battered courtyard. He told the story of Lyanna and Robert's love, of the hidden ceremony, of Ned's vow. He revealed the tattered parchment, letting those closest see the signatures. Some men murmured in confusion, some in disbelief, but they listened. Reed ended by telling them of Ned's death at Joffrey's hands, and the savage war the Lannisters waged upon the north. "Robert's son stands before you," Reed concluded. "He has Ned Stark's moral fiber and Robert Baratheon's bloodline. I urge you, for the sake of our realm and the memory of Eddard Stark, to recognize him as the rightful king, rather than that Lannister bastard who sits the throne." Jon swallowed hard, waiting. The men looked among themselves. One older knight, gray in beard and stooped, asked, "What of King Robb in the north? Have we not declared ourselves independent of the Iron Throne?" Another said, "Aye, we have. The Lannisters have proven poor overlords. Why trade one new king for another?" Jon cleared his throat. "I understand your hesitation. Robb is my cousin by blood. I love him as a brother. I owe him loyalty, but I also believe the realm can only stand strong if united. Winter is coming, and not just in the words of House Stark. There are threats beyond the wall, terrors that will require every sword the realm can raise. If we remain divided while Lannisters rule in King's Landing, we will be easy prey for that darkness. I do not seek to subjugate the North. I would gladly name Robb Warden of the North, if he and the North wish to rejoin the kingdom. Or if the North insists on its independence, I will not force them with steel. My claim is to the Iron Throne, to protect all the 7 kingdoms from the Lannisters and from the greater evil to come." His words hung in the air. A younger knight, standing near the front, looked from Jon to Reed and back to Jon. "You speak with honesty," he said. "I can see Ned Stark in you. Maybe Robert too, though I never knew him well." He spat. "The Lannisters have wronged the North. If you aim to topple them, I'll follow you, boy, if only because I owe Ned Stark a debt of honor." At that, a few others nodded. Some gave grudging murmurs of agreement. More than one voice rose, calling Jon the rightful king if this was all true. Others hesitated, uncertain about opposing Robb. But for now, it seemed they would at least ride with Jon to speak with the young wolf. Jon felt relief and dread war together in his heart. This was a first step, a single rung of the ladder. The next rung was to kneel before Robb Stark, to present his truth, and see if his cousin would become an ally or see him as a threat. They marched south. The battered Ewin retreated to protect King's Landing, consolidating forces. The nights turned cold again, edging toward winter. Then came the decisive moment. A plan to strike at the heart, to lay siege to King's Landing, or at least force Tywin into open battle. Rumors suggested that the Tyrells might not be fully committed to Joffrey, that some were uneasy about the boy king's cruelty. But for now, they remained in alliance, with Margaery Tyrell betrothed to Joffrey. The northern host advanced carefully. They parted ways with some river lords who guarded their own territories. Robb commanded the center, with Grey Wind, his direwolf, prowling near. Jon rode among the vanguard, with Ghost at his side, a formidable sight that rallied the men. Along the march, they were joined by deserters from Stannis' failed campaign, men who had lost faith in the elder Baratheon. Some Stormlanders also joined, once they heard that Robert Baratheon's trueborn heir was in the field, promising justice. Between Robb's momentum and the loyalty Jon's name ignited, their combined army swelled. Still, it might not match the defenders if the Tyrells and the Lannisters were unified. A cunning plan was needed. Roose Bolton, ever the strategist, suggested dividing the Lannisters from the Tyrells through subterfuge, or perhaps capturing someone important. Others proposed an assault on the supply lines from Highgarden. Jon grew wary of Bolton's methods, too slippery, too cold, but recognized the value of strategy. Robb also listened to the Blackfish, who advocated a swift siege to force a confrontation. The tension rose as they neared King's Landing. Scouts reported Lannister forces positioned along the Rose Road, supplemented by Tyrell bannermen. The city itself bristled with new defenses built after Stannis' defeat. A direct assault on the walls would be costly. They needed a better way. And so, under the cloak of night, Robb and Jon's war council gathered to plan. "We must force Tywin's hand," said Robb, leaning over the war table. "If he stays behind the walls, they can outlast us with supplies from the Tyrells. But if we lure him into the field, he'll have the advantage of a prepared position," said Roose Bolton in his quiet, unsettling tone. "We could bleed ourselves white against their lines." Jon studied the map. "What if we convince the Tyrells that they're on the losing side? Or at least show them an opportunity to switch allegiances?" "They won't betray a done deal," said Bolton. "The Tyrells have the king's ear. Marjorie is set to wed Joffrey, securing their hold. Unless we present them something greater." Robb's expression tightened. "We don't have a princess to offer them. Or do we?" He frowned. "Sansa is a hostage in King's Landing, married off to Tyrion Lannister, so rumor says. Arya is missing. My mother, a Tully, means nothing to the Tyrells." Jon felt a twist in his gut hearing Sansa's predicament. "So we must rely on steel, not marriage pacts. Maybe a quick strike on the road. If we defeat the Tyrell Lannister host in the field, the city might surrender rather than starve." The Blackfish grunted approval. "I say we choose the ground. The Lannisters will want to fight near their supply lines. We can send a small force to feign a direct siege. Then, as they come out to break it, we strike from behind." Roose Bolton's eyes gleamed. "A trap. It suits me fine." They hammered out the details. Over the next days, the northern host positioned itself carefully, making a show of preparing siege works. Meanwhile, a second contingent under Robb's direct command slipped around the city's perimeter, using knowledge gleaned from local guides. Jon led a third detachment, aiming to cut off the roads. The idea was to draw Tywin and Mace Tyrell out to crush what appeared to be an overextended or disorganized siege. Then the second and third groups would converge, catching them in a pincer. Battle day dawned under a bleak, steel-gray sky. A bitter wind whipped across the plains before King's Landing. Jon's heart hammered in his chest, though outwardly he tried to project calm. He donned mail, strapped Longclaw to his belt, a Valyrian steel blade given to him at the wall, and checked on Ghost, who prowled near his horse. They had set up earthworks, siege towers half-built, looking vulnerable. The watchers on the walls would report it to Tywin and Mace Tyrell. Soon, the gates would open, and the enemy would pour out to break them. Robb's group lay in hiding behind a stand of trees to the west, awaiting the moment to surge. The horns sounded from King's Landing. The gates opened. A mass of gold and red banners unfurled, along with green and gold Tyrell sigils. Thousands of men marched out, cavalry leading the vanguard, foot soldiers trailing. A drumbeat thundered across the field. Jon swallowed, his breath misting. He had perhaps 2,000 men with him at these faux siege lines. The Lannister Tyrell host might be 4 times that number. The plan hinged on timing. "Hold position," Jon ordered, voice steady. "Wait for my signal." The men nodded, tension etched on their faces. Archers lined the hastily built ramparts. Foot soldiers waited behind sharpened stakes. Cavalry on the flanks readied themselves. Ghost prowled with hackles raised, a faint growl in his throat. The enemy advanced. Jon glimpsed golden lions on crimson fields, the curling golden rows of House Tyrell, the glint of steel helms. He urged his horse forward. "Archers, knock," he called. 100 bowstrings drew taut. He raised his sword. "Loose!" A volley of arrows whistled overhead. The Lannister front ranks raised shields, some men falling. The real fighting began. The enemy cavalry thundered forward, smashing into the stakes. Jon's men braced spears. Shouts, screams, and clangs of metal filled the air. Jon spurred his horse to rally a flank. Longclaw bared. He felt the adrenaline surge. This was the chaos of war. He hacked at a knight in gold plate, deflecting a lance that came too near. Ghost leapt upon a second foe, dragging him from the saddle. But soon the weight of numbers pressed. The Lannister line threatened to overrun the ramparts. Jon could see panic in some of his men. They were heavily outnumbered. "Hold!" Jon shouted. "Stand your ground." He prayed Robb would appear soon. The plan demanded precise timing. From the corner of his eye, he saw the Great Jon leading a charge of northern cavalry on the left flank, bellowing as they crashed into the mass of Tyrell spearmen. The field became a swirl of mud, blood, and churned grass. Clouds of dust rose. Jon fought fiercely, parrying a blow that could have split his skull, returning it with a slash to the attacker's neck. But they were being pressed back. Then came the sound of distant horns, echoing across the field. Jon's heart leapt. Robb. He glimpsed movement on the western horizon. Ranks of mounted men bearing the direwolf banner, surging forward. The trap was sprung. The Lannisters and Tyrells, overcommit, turned to face this new threat. For a moment, confusion reigned in their ranks. Jon seized the chance. "To me!" he cried, rallying the battered defenders. They surged forward in renewed fury. The Lannister line buckled. Jon glimpsed Robb at the head of his cavalry, gray wind bounding alongside, tearing into the stunned foe. The roar of men and beasts filled the air. The Tyrell ranks wavered, some falling back. In that instant, a second horn blast sounded, the third contingent, emerging from the south to cut off the retreat. The noose tightened. The Lannisters were caught in a pincer, unable to fully maneuver. The battle devolved into scattered pockets of fighting. Jon pressed onward, hacking through the press of men. He watched crossbow bolts whiz past. The clang of steel on steel hammered at his ears. A half hour of frenzied combat felt like an eternity. Blood spattered his mail, the ring of swords numbing his senses. Ghost fought near him, snarling at any who dared approach. At last, the enemy lines began to break. Jon saw golden banners collapse into retreat. The Tyrell lines parted, some men throwing down arms. The Lannisters tried to rally around a knight in ornate armor, perhaps the King's Guard or someone else of note. But then Robb's cavalry crashed in. The knight fell, unhorsed. Surrender shouts rose from a portion of the foe. Others fled toward the city walls, but the gates had shut. King's Landing, fearful of letting the victorious Northerners inside, had closed them out. The Lannisters outside the gates were trapped. The Tyrell High Command, if present, was in disarray. At last, the fighting subsided. Smoke and dust hung in the air. Bodies littered the field. Crows circled overhead, anticipating the feast. Jon felt exhaustion claim him as he reined in his horse near Robb. The young wolf's eyes shone with triumph and sorrow combined. Men cheered sporadically. Prisoners were gathered. Mace Tyrell was nowhere to be found, likely in the city or in the rearguard. But a contingent of Tyrell bannermen had been captured, including some minor lords. The Lannister casualties were high. Robb dismounted and Jon followed suit. They clasped forearms. "Well fought," Robb said, voice tight with emotion. Jon managed a nod. "You too. Now, King's Landing stands before us." They gazed at the distant walls. One final hurdle, storming or negotiating the city. The defenders might be reeling after such a loss, but King's Landing had withstood many sieges before, and Joffrey remained inside, along with Cersei, the King's Guard, and the City Watch. Could still be a bloodbath. But in the days that followed, the combined Stark Baratheon host encircled King's Landing. The Tyrells within the walls were shaken by the defeat outside. Rumors abounded that Margaery Tyrell refused to go through with the marriage after seeing the Lannisters' precarious position. Word spread that the small folk, starving and resentful, might welcome a new king. Jon and Robb demanded Joffrey's surrender. Silence. They demanded again, citing the rightful claim of Robert's heir. Inside the city, a swirl of intrigue played out. Varys, the spider, might have conspired to undermine Joffrey. Tyrion Lannister was rumored to be imprisoned or sidelined. Queen Cersei tried to cling to power. Tension mounted. Then one morning, without warning, the main gates opened from the inside. A riot erupted among the small folk. The gold cloaks, undermanned and poorly fed, were overwhelmed. The northern scouts reported widespread chaos. By midday, thousands of small folk had surged out of the city, seeking safety or fleeing the madness. The outer wards were consumed by bedlam. The Highgarden men who remained with Joffrey were rumored to be turning cloak. Sensing the end, Jon and Robb advanced carefully with their best troops, pushing into the city behind the wave of fleeing smallfolk. The defenders offered patchy resistance, pockets of loyal Lannister men, but discipline collapsed. The city watch surrendered in droves. Jon found himself riding through the cobbled streets of King's Landing, among the throngs of panicked people. He felt a strange, hollow excitement. Robert Baratheon had taken the city decades ago. Now his son entered it in the midst of a popular uprising. Fire crackled in places. Shops and manors were pillaged by the mob. Jon ordered his men to restore order where they could, to protect the innocent, but chaos was rampant. They pressed on toward the Red Keep, the great fortress overlooking Blackwater Bay. The approach to the Red Keep was guarded by the Kingsguard, or what remained of it. A stand of knights in white cloaks blocked the gate. Jon recognized one, Ser Meryn Trant, who had struck Sansa in the throne room, so rumor said. At Robb's side, the great Jon bellowed a challenge. The knights made a brief, desperate stand, but they were outnumbered and battered. When the great Jon hacked down one, the others yielded or died. The gates were forced open. The Stark and Baratheon banners flew high. Jon dismounted in the keep's courtyard, heart pounding. He turned to his men. "Secure the gates," he ordered. "No looting. We're here to bring justice, not cause more suffering." They nodded, fanning out with stern discipline. Robb also barked orders, leaving Bolton and others to hold the perimeter. Then they moved into the halls of the Red Keep, searching for Joffrey. They found Tywin Lannister first, or his body. He lay in the corridor leading to the throne room, a crossbow bolt in his chest. No one knew who fired it. Possibly a betrayal by a city watchman or a vengeful sparrow. The great Lion of the Rock died ingloriously on a cold marble floor. Robb stared at the corpse, remembering this was the man behind the Red Wedding in another timeline, though not here. He said nothing, stepping over the body. Finally, they reached the throne room. The high doors were ajar. Inside, sunlight fell in dusty beams through shattered windows. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, swords twisted in dark metal. Joffrey stood at its base, shrieking at two Kingsguard knights to protect him. Ser Meryn was nowhere to be seen, likely fallen. Another knight lay in a pool of blood. Queen Cersei was behind Joffrey, eyes wild, her hair disheveled. She clutched a dagger, as if prepared to kill or be killed. Jon and Robb entered with their retinue. The two knights tried to form a defensive line. Joffrey screeched, "Don't let them pass. I am the king. Kill them. Do your duty." But the men hesitated, seeing the hopelessness. Robb brandished his sword. "Throw down your arms and you will live," he said, voice echoing. One knight complied at once, dropping his blade. The other hesitated, but when Cersei bellowed at him to fight, he shook his head and backed away, casting his sword aside. Joffrey's face twisted in a mask of terror and fury. "Traitors! I'll have your heads." Cersei's eyes fixed on Jon. She spat at him. "You're not Robert's get. This is madness. Lies and slander." She brandished the dagger. "My son is the king. You won't take the throne from him. Not while I live." Jon stepped forward, sword in hand. He tried to keep his voice steady. "You have lost, Cersei. The city is ours. Surrender and you may yet live. Both of you." Joffrey snarled, climbing the steps to the Iron Throne. "I will not yield. I am the king." He grabbed the arm of the throne, as if it might give him power. "Guards! Someone! Kill them!" His voice broke, half sobbing. Cersei pressed her lips into a snarl. "He is the rightful king." "No," Jon said, raising his sword. "He is not. He is the product of your incest with Jaime Lannister." The words resounded in the chamber. "You deceived Robert and the realm. Joffrey is no Baratheon." Joffrey shrieked, face contorting with rage. He leapt from the throne dais, swinging a short sword clumsily at Jon. Jon sidestepped easily, hooking the blade with Longclaw and sending it clattering across the floor. Joffrey stumbled, fear in his eyes. He reached for another weapon, but Robb advanced, sword held low. "It's over," Robb said. "Surrender." Cersei lunged, dagger raised, aiming for Jon's chest, but Ghost, who had slunk around the perimeter, sprang forward, snapping at her hand. Cersei shrieked, dropping the dagger. She fell to her knees, cradling her bloodied wrist. Ghost growled, fangs bared. Joffrey stared, cornered, then tried to run. Robb seized his arm, twisting it painfully until the boy screamed. Jon felt no triumph. He saw only the boy who had ordered Ned Stark's execution, a vicious, spoiled creature, raised on lies and cruelty. But it was time for justice. "By the authority of Robert Baratheon's blood," Jon said, voice cold. "And in the name of Eddard Stark, you are under arrest for the murder of Lord Stark and for usurping the throne." Joffrey sobbed, tears streaming. Cersei hissed curses. Robb's men came forward, binding their hands. The mad reign of Joffrey Baratheon ended in that moment, undone by the united strength of the North and the newly revealed Baratheon heir. Outside, the city roiled in half-savage celebration. The Lannister soldiers still alive surrendered or fled. The Tyrells who remained quickly bent the knee, outraged by the revelations of Joffrey's parentage. Margaery Tyrell famously declared she had no intention of wedding an abomination of incest. The small folk cheered for the downfall of the hated boy king. They whispered about the new king who had deposed him. Some called him the White Wolf, some the Storm Wolf, some the rightful heir of Robert. That evening, in the throne room still strewn with debris of the battle, Robb Stark placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "It's your throne by blood," he said. "Take your seat." Jon stared at the Iron Throne, an ugly sprawl of metal. He felt a twinge of dread. It was no seat of comfort or peace. Yet the realm now demanded a king. Slowly, he walked up the steps, footsteps echoing. Ghost padded behind him, silent as a phantom. Jon turned to face those assembled. Robb, Lady Catelyn, the Northern Lords, the captured Tyrell bannermen, the River Lords, and the swirl of courtiers who had begun to reemerge. They all looked at him with expectation or awe or fear. Jon swallowed hard, heart pounding in his ears. He lowered himself onto the Iron Throne. Swords pressed against his back and legs. It was cold steel, no gentle seat. A hush fell over the hall. "I did not seek this," Jon said, voice carrying in the silence. "But I will accept it if it means the realm can find justice, unity, and peace. I swear by the old gods and the new, I will rule justly, as my mother and father would have wanted. The Lannisters who remain will face trial. Joffrey is deposed. His claim is undone. If the North desires independence, I will respect their choice. If they will stay with the realm, I will treat them with the honor they deserve." His words echoed. Robb Stark lowered himself to one knee, offering fealty, or at least acknowledging the moment. Some in the crowd followed suit. Others, uncertain, remained standing. But the hush was absolute. A new dawn had arrived. King's Landing had known the wrath of war, but in this new king, this quiet, steadfast young man with a direwolf at his side, there might be a glimmer of hope. Or so the small folk dared to dream. In the days after, the realm began to reorder itself. Cersei and Joffrey languished in cells, soon to face trial. Tyrion Lannister, found imprisoned, was released. He offered wry commentary and possibly counsel to the new regime. The Tyrells, wanting to salvage their position, bent the knee to Jon. Mace Tyrell swore loyalty, though his pride was stung. He suggested his daughter Margaery might marry this new king, forging a strong alliance for the realm. Jon, overwhelmed, did not give an immediate answer. Robb Stark wrestled with the question of the North's independence. Many northern lords clamored to remain free, to crown Robb as king in the North. Others saw advantage in reuniting with the Iron Throne under Ned Stark's nephew. Ultimately, Robb convened a grand council of northern lords. After fierce debate, they agreed to rejoin the realm under King Jon Baratheon if certain conditions were met. Chief among them, guaranteed autonomy in local matters and official acknowledgement of the North's traditions. Jon granted these concessions readily. Thus, the North was brought back into the royal fold. Shortly after, in a solemn ceremony in the Great September of Baelor, where the faith demanded to see the new king consecrated, Jon stood in dark finery, the black of House Stark embroidered with the stag of Baratheon in gold. The High Septon performed the coronation with measured gravity. Robb and other northern lords, the Tyrells, even the Martells, represented by a small delega. Tywin were there witnessing history. Outside, the city thronged with curious crowds. When the High Septon placed a new crown upon Jon's head, black iron set with a single chunk of dragonglass in homage to his northern heritage, he became King Jon of the houses Baratheon and Stark, first of his name. A hush fell, then roars of acclamation. The realm had a king who was not a Lannister puppet, nor a usurper, but a scion of Robert Baratheon and Lyanna Stark, blessed by the memory of Ned Stark's honor. Yet for Jon, as he gazed at the adoring crowd, only one thought burned in his mind. Beyond all the tasks of governance, the punishments for traitors, the reordering of the small council, the dealing with Sansa's forced marriage, the rebuilding of war-torn lands. Above all, he knew that winter was coming. He had felt it in his bones beyond the wall. The White Walkers were stirring, an ancient evil. If the realm was to survive, they needed unity, not petty squabbles. He prayed the southern lords would heed his warnings. He prayed he could muster the entire kingdom to stand against the long night. For now, though the realm celebrated, the vile boy king was gone, the Lannisters' stranglehold broken. A Baratheon with Stark blood sat upon the throne. Some said he had Robert's courage and Ned's sense of justice. Others whispered that the burdens of the crown would crush him eventually. But none could deny he had come far from the cold ramparts of the wall. Late that night, after feasting and ceremonies, Jon slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. Ghost padded at his feet, silent. Below, torches glimmered like fallen stars, the black water of the bay shimmering in the moonlight. He let the night wind brush his face. The crown felt heavy on his brow. He had come so far, and the journey was far from over. Robb found him there, leaning against the carved stone balustrade. "We did it," Robb said softly, coming to stand beside him. Jon nodded, eyes on the bay. "Aye, but have we truly won? Or just begun a new war? The war for the dawn." Robb exhaled. "We'll face it together. The North stands behind you, as does most of the realm now. And you've me, always." Jon glanced at his cousin, no, his brother in all but name, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "We'll need every bit of help. The threat beyond the wall is real, Robb. Before the snows grow too deep, we must start preparing. Weapons of dragonglass and Valyrian steel. Strong lines of communication with the Watch. The time will come when we must send armies north, not south." Robb nodded. "Then so be it. We have the realm's might, or we soon will. If you command it, I will take men and hold the wall against these White Walkers." They fell silent for a moment, each lost in thought. Then Jon asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder what Father would think of this? Of us, standing here?" Robb's gaze turned distant. "All the time. I hope he'd be proud." Jon swallowed the lump in his throat. "I think he would be. He sacrificed so much for us, for the realm. I intend to make sure his sacrifice was not in vain." Robb placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. The two young men, each shaped by Ned Stark's influence, gazed out over the city that now called Jon its king. Below, a hush fell over King's Landing as the hour grew late. The revelers dwindled, leaving silent streets. The wind carried the faint sense of smoke, sea brine, and the pungent odor of so many cramped souls living side by side. The city had suffered, the realm had suffered, but for the moment, there was hope. Jon stood there until the moon rose high. He remembered who he was, who he had been, and who he would become. Jon Snow was gone. In his place sat Jon of House Baratheon, with Stark blood in his veins, crowned by a swirl of fate and war. The burdens of kingship pressed like the weight of 1,000 winter snows. But if he had learned anything from Ned Stark from his time at the Wall, it was that duty came first. He would do what must be done to protect the realm from the horrors that lurked in the cold darkness. And if he had inherited even a fraction of Robert's strength and Ned's honor, maybe, just maybe, he could succeed where others had failed. The war with the Lannisters was over. The war for the Dawn had yet to begin. But at least, in this moment, the realm stood behind its new king, the boy who had once believed himself a bastard and now held the power to shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Tomorrow, he would address the court, pass judgment on Joffrey, and begin forging alliances with Storm Lords, River Lords, Vale Lords, and others. He would face the friction within the North, the ambitions of House Greyjoy, the cunning of Peter Baelish, the anger of those Lannisters who still lived. He would need all his wits and all his resilience. Winter would not wait. But as he stood with Robb at his side and Ghost at his feet, King Jon Baratheon allowed himself one moment of calm triumph. From the darkness of the Wall to the pinnacle of the Iron Throne, his journey was impossible, yet it had become reality. He closed his eyes and whispered a silent vow to Ned Stark's spirit, to Lyanna, to Robert, and to all those who had bled to give him this chance. He would not fail them. Let the white ravens fly. Let winter come. He was ready to meet it, and he would not stand alone. The flickering torchlight of King's Landing cast shadows across the balcony. But for the first time in Jon's life, the future held more than shadows. It held the promise of a realm united, a realm that could face whatever horrors lay beyond the edge of the world. And in that promise, he found strength. He found purpose. He found the will to sit the Iron Throne and reign as the son of Lyanna Stark and Robert Baratheon, with Ned Stark's honor in his heart. A hush lingered in the corridor outside the royal apartments, deep in the Red Keep. Night pressed in from the windows, the sky cloaked in a moonless dark that made King's Landing feel more like a slumbering beast than the capital of a newly crowned king. Jon stood there, newly anointed king of the Seven Kingdoms, yet hardly able to believe what had transpired over the past weeks. The Iron Throne was his by blood and by conquest. Joffrey sat chained in a cell awaiting judgment, and the realm was a tapestry of frayed loyalties and simmering tensions that could unravel at the slightest misstep. He gazed at Ghost, who padded silently along the stone floor at his side. The direwolf's red eyes glowed in the torchlight, watchful, protective. Jon murmured a soft word under his breath, and Ghost responded with a low, pleased rumble. The wolf's presence steadied Jon's nerves. Even as he walked halls where Targaryens had once ruled, where Robert Baratheon had reigned, he felt the weight of the crown like a vice on his temples. Yet no part of him regretted the path he had taken. Some destinies, he supposed, could not be avoided forever. He paused before the door to his new solar, a room once used by the likes of Cersei or Robert himself. The gold and crimson drapery had been pulled down by his order, replaced with simpler, subtler hangings. A single candle flickered from inside, illuminating the shape of a figure seated at a small table. Jon knew who waited there. Tyrion Lannister, newly released from his imprisonment, brought forth at Jon's request. Tyrion had once been Hand of the King, or Acting Hand, under Joffrey, and had tried to inject some measure of sense into the boy's reign. That effort had earned him scorn, and ultimately he had been cast aside when his father Tywin took power. Now, Tywin lay dead in a corridor, shot by an unknown hand during the chaos of the city's fall, and Tyrion was left with no illusions about his family's station. Jon opened the door gently. Tyrion, hunched over a cup of wine, looked up, revealing a face drawn with fatigue and a bitterness he did little to hide. The torch's glow danced across his mismatched eyes, one dark, one flecked with green and gold. Tyrion gave a small, ironic bow of his head. "Your Grace," he said, the words emerging with a slight slur, though whether from sadness or wine, Jon could not be certain. "I trust you've found a moment to breathe between the chaos of conquest and the demands of rulership?" Jon closed the door. Ghost slipped in, remaining near the threshold. "A moment, if that," Jon said, voice low. He rested a hand lightly on the hilt of Longclaw, a habit now when he felt uncertain. I asked you to come because I need counsel, and there are few in King's Landing whose counsel I trust. Tyrion studied him with an arched brow. The last king who trusted me ended up losing favor with his mother, his grandfather, and half the court. I'm not sure if that's a recommendation or a warning. Jon pulled out a chair opposite Tyrion. Despite the outcome, your efforts to keep the city from tearing itself apart are well known to me. I spoke to men in the city watch, to some lords who were here during Stannis' assault. They said you were the true hero of the Battle of the Blackwater, and that you alone had the sense to prepare the wildfire trap. They also said Joffrey repaid you poorly. Tyrion let out a humorless laugh. Poorly is an understatement. I lost my position, nearly lost my life, and found myself locked away. A Lannister always pays his debts, or so they say, but apparently, that courtesy doesn't extend to family if one displeases Lord Tywin. His face shadowed. He's gone now, though, and my dear nephew Joffrey is in chains. I doubt my father ever imagined such an end. Jon looked at the candle flame, which wavered in the stir of air. Tywin Lannister was formidable, Jon said, but the realm cannot dwell on the might of House Lannister anymore. I must restore order, and I need good men and women who can think and speak freely, unclouded by blind ambition or cruelty. Tyrion snorted. Then you have come to the wrong court, your grace. Ambition is the coin of the realm here, cruelty a close cousin. He took a sip of wine. But I appreciate your optimism. If you truly plan to rule for the good of the people, you'll find it a heavier burden than any conquest. The city's poor are restless, the noble houses are suspicious, and the rest of the 7 kingdoms is in tatters from war. By the way, your brother, pardon me, your cousin, King Robb is still camped outside the walls, is he not? He is, Jon said. We have begun discussing the future of the North. He agreed to rejoin the realm, provided I grant the North certain liberties and a promise that never again will the crown take the North for granted. I've made that promise gladly. I trust Robb as I trust myself. Tyrion's gaze flicked downward. That alone is a remarkable shift from your father's approach. Robert never quite grasped the intricacies of the North, though Ned Stark was loyal as the day is long. We see how that ended. Tyrion's mouth tightened, as if remembering something. But that also means you have to handle the rest of the realm, all of which has been battered by this war. The Tyrells are reeling. Your victory was decisive. Will you strip them of lands? Or do you intend to form a new alliance? Jon leaned back in his chair. Mace Tyrell has already bent the knee. He blames the Lannisters for everything and claims his only mistake was trusting them. It's a convenient bit of revision, but I won't push House Tyrell into open rebellion by humiliating them. They hold the reach which feeds the entire kingdom. If the White Walkers come, he paused, remembering the threat beyond the wall. We'll need their harvests. I would rather have the Tyrells as allies than enemies. Tyrion studied Jon's face. You sound nothing like Joffrey, or even Robert at his most self-assured. In fact, you sound rather too practical for your own good. Jon allowed himself a faint smile. I'll take that as a compliment. Will you help me, Tyrion Lannister? Will you serve as my hand? The small man set down his cup so abruptly that wine sloshed onto the table. Your hand? He repeated, voice hushed. Surely you jest. I am a Lannister. My sister stands accused of incest and regicide, or near enough, and my nephew is in chains for murdering Ned Stark and other crimes. The realm hates my family's name. You are not your sister, nor are you your nephew, Jon said quietly. And if I am to rule fairly, I should judge men on their deeds, not on the sins of their kin. I know you have a keen mind. I know you wish for stability in the realm more than you wish for the Lannisters to keep power at any cost. You saved this city once. Help me save it again, from itself. Tyrion paused for a long time, eyes drifting toward the guttering candle. Then he gave a short, half-bitter laugh. If you can keep me alive long enough to do any good, then yes, your grace, I accept. But I hope you realize what you invite. The realm may see it as an insult, that you pick a Lannister to be your hand after toppling Lannister rule. I would rather risk the appearance of contradiction than ignore a capable advisor, Jon said. Truthfully, I also suspect you can help me with your brother Jaime, if you still have any influence there. He was once the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, but I haven't seen him since we took the city. Some claim he's vanished. Others say he's fled. We may need to find him, or at least know his intentions. Tyrion's face darkened, but he nodded. I'll see what I can do. Jaime may be many things, but he's still my brother. I'll speak with him if he can be found. Jon rose, taking that as agreement. Thank you. For now, rest. Tomorrow we'll announce you as Hand of the King, unless you prefer Master of Coin. I could use you in that role as well, but I believe your talents will better serve in the higher seat. Tyrion gave a wry grin, pushing back from the table. Hand of the King, then. May the gods have mercy on us both. They parted ways, Ghost following at Jon's heel. Outside, the corridor was darker still. The torches flickered with half-burnt stubs, and most of the castle's denizens slept. Jon made his way toward what used to be the royal chambers, once occupied by Robert, then by Joffrey. He himself hadn't yet slept there, preferring a smaller bedchamber for his first few nights, as if reluctant to assume all the trappings of royalty. But he knew eventually he must. The crown weighed on him, and so would the bed in which kings had died. As he passed a gallery lined with the skulls of Targaryen dragons, he paused. The largest skull, near the far end, loomed like a demon in the gloom. Balerion, the Black Dread. Though centuries dead, the bones radiated an unsettling aura of ancient power. Jon felt a prickle along his arms. He murmured a silent vow. If Targaryen might had once claimed this city, and the Lannisters had after them, let him rule differently. Let his reign be one of duty, not tyranny. He'd seen enough tyranny from Joffrey to last a lifetime. He reached the small bedchamber where he'd taken up temporary residence, guarded by 2 sworn swords from the north. They saluted stiffly. "Your Grace," one muttered, stepping aside. Jon dismissed them for the night, wanting only Ghost's presence. He entered, removed his cloak, and sank onto the bed's edge. Ghost sat at his feet, watchful. The day had felt interminable, and his mind buzzed with events yet unresolved. Joffrey's trial, the question of Cersei's guilt, the tension with the remnants of House Lannister, the White Walkers overshadowing everything like a distant thundercloud. And overshadowing even that was his uncertain lineage with House Baratheon, the knowledge that he was forging a new legacy from that blood. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city's exhausted inhabitants drifted to sleep or into nightmares. Jon considered lying down, but the bed felt as if it might swallow him. Instead, he rose, walking to the narrow window. He glimpsed the faint glow of scattered lanterns across the city, the ghosts of smoke from the earlier battles. He closed his eyes and pictured Winterfell, the crisp northern sky, the hush of fresh snowfall. Home in so many ways. Yet he was here, in King's Landing, with a destiny neither he nor anyone else had foreseen. Weariness finally claimed him. He slipped out of his clothes and into a thin nightshirt, letting the day's burdens slide away for a few hours. Ghost curled up near the bed, resting his muzzle on his paws. Jon fell into a fitful sleep, dreaming of dragon skulls and swirling snow, dreaming of a throne forged from swords and a never-ending winter creeping south. Dawn broke, gray and pallid. The city awoke to news that the new king intended to hold court in the throne room to address urgent matters. The official naming of his hand, the immediate future of the Tyrell alliance, and the status of Joffrey Baratheon, currently a prisoner. Word spread quickly, and the great hall began to fill with lords, knights, and a smattering of curious onlookers who had managed to secure entry. The rumor of a trial for the deposed king churned excitement as well as dread. Jon arrived from his bedchamber dressed in dark, subdued clothing, with only a single golden clasp at his shoulder in the shape of a stag. That clasp was the only ornamentation that declared him Baratheon. Around his waist, he wore the sword belt that once belonged to Ned Stark, the belt that had come with Longclaw's scabbard. He needed no other finery. He mounted the dais steps, pausing before the Iron Throne. For a moment, he simply looked at it, at the labyrinth of melted blades, So many centuries of conquest hammered into a single seat. Then, remembering he was king now, he turned and faced the assembled court. He did not sit. A hush fell. At his left stood Robb Stark in a plain tunic, a heavy fur-lined cloak draped over his shoulders. Next to Robb, Lady Catelyn observed quietly. On Jon's right, Maester Aemon, who had journeyed south at Jon's request, stood with trembling hands folded in front of him, blind eyes fixed inward. Near them also was Howland Reed, the unassuming Craneglord who had revealed Jon's parentage in the first place. The northern presence was palpable on that dais, underscoring the sense of a new era. Jon's gaze swept the hall. Lannister bannermen clustered uneasily in one corner, Tyrell knights in another, dwarfed in number by the Northmen and river lords who had accompanied Robb. Even as king, Jon could feel the tension in the air. Years of hostility did not vanish overnight. Some eyes regarded him with hope, others with caution. He cleared his throat softly, and his voice carried in the stillness. "Good people of King's Landing, lords and knights of the realm, I thank you for gathering today. Many of you saw or heard of the chaos that befell this city when we took it from the false king Joffrey Baratheon. Yet I do not wish to punish an entire city for the sins of a single boy and his mother. We are here to mend the wounds of war." He let that stand for a beat. Several in the crowd shifted, uncertain whether to cheer. "I will rule this realm in justice," Jon went on. "Part of that justice is giving each man and woman a fair hearing. Joffrey Baratheon, born of incest between Queen Cersei and her brother Jaime Lannister, was placed on the throne under false pretenses. He has committed crimes against the realm, and he shall stand trial. That trial will be conducted fairly, with witnesses, so none can say we executed him in haste." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some sounded surprised, others outraged or scornful. But Jon lifted a hand, and the murmurs died. "Until that trial, he remains in custody. None shall harm him without my leave. The realm needs to break the cycle of violence, and that begins with a proper trial." A hush. Perhaps some in the crowd expected instant vengeance. Perhaps others worried Joffrey might somehow wriggle free. But Jon refused to do anything rash. He had seen enough beheadings and cruelty in King's Landing to know that the realm craved some measure of due process. "Next," Jon said, "I wish to announce that Tyrion Lannister, formerly Hand of the King under Joffrey, has agreed to serve as my hand." Lord Tyrion proved himself a capable and pragmatic leader during the darkest hours of the Blackwater Siege. "I hold no illusions about the complexities of House Lannister's past actions, but I believe in judging a man by his own deeds." Lord Tyrion stepped forward. From the side of the hall, Tyrion emerged, clad in a simple doublet of black, with a gold hand clasp at the breast. He walked with a slight limp. Jon suspected a war wound or perhaps a remnant of the blow he'd taken at the Blackwater. The crowd parted in near silence. Some sneered, some gaped. Tyrion climbed the dais steps and bowed to Jon, then turned to face the hall. "As the king says," Tyrion began, "I served as hand for my nephew and saw the rottenness at court. My name is Lannister, but do not assume that means I approve of what my sister or nephew did. I accept this office, hoping to bring reason where once there was madness. You have my word that I will do my best to restore stability, to quell famine, and to ensure the king's justice is done without bias." He glanced toward the cluster of Lannister bannermen, noting their mixed expressions. Some relief, some suspicion. Mace Tyrell was not present, but his heir, Willis Tyrell, had come in his father's stead. That man watched silently, eyes keen, as if appraising every nuance. The official naming was swift. Jon took Tyrion's hand, repeating the vow, then turned to the court. "Henceforth, Lord Tyrion Lannister is Hand of the King. Those who would question his authority question mine." A few uncertain cheers rose, joined by stony silence from others. Tyrion wore a brittle half-smile, aware that this was no immediate victory, but at least the first step toward forging something new. He stepped aside. Jon continued, "I also name Maester Aemon Targaryen as my Grand Maester, should he accept. He has guided me wisely before, and I trust in his counsel." Aemon, blind and frail, still carried an air of quiet dignity. His milky eyes turned toward Jon's voice, and he gave a slight nod. "Your Grace, I am old, older than any man I know, but if I can serve the realm even a little while longer, I will do so. I accept if the conclave agrees." "Then let us see that they do," Jon said gently. He knew some in the Citadel might balk at a Targaryen returning to such a high station, but Aemon had proven his loyalty to the realm countless times. Besides, with war looming in the north, Jon wanted a maester he trusted at his side. He took a breath. "We have many other matters to address. But for now, let all men know that I, Jon of House Baratheon, also of House Stark by my mother's blood, do not intend to strip loyal houses of their lands or titles, nor do I intend to sow more discord. Lay down your arms, swear fealty, and join me in rebuilding the kingdom. Anyone who persists in rebellion or lawlessness will face the crown's justice. We cannot afford further chaos when winter draws near and an even greater threat looms." At that, he paused, letting his words settle. The crowd stirred, uncertain what threat he meant. They'd heard rumor of the White Walkers, but many took it as northern superstition. "For now, this court is dismissed," Jon concluded. "I will remain in council with my hand and my advisors. Let each lord see to his men, ensuring they keep the peace. In the coming days, we will finalize the details of Joffrey's trial. Until then, may the gods grant us the wisdom we need." He stepped back. A wave of activity resumed, the hall filling with murmured speculation and subdued talk. Robb nodded at Jon, a hint of approval in his eyes, and moved off to speak with northern lords. Tyrion lingered close, watching the swirling mass of courtiers. Lady Catelyn quietly slipped from the dais, possibly to discuss her daughter's fates. Sansa was rumored to be in the city, forcibly wed to Tyrion himself, though that union had never been consummated. Arya remained missing. Jon finally sank onto the Iron Throne, though only briefly, letting the swirl of onlookers see him seated. Steel pressed uncomfortably into his back, a grim reminder that kingship was not meant to be easy. Ghost, always watchful, sat at the bottom of the dais with pricked ears. He endured the hush that fell whenever eyes turned to him. Let them look. Let them see a man who wore no finery but bore the name of Baratheon, the look of a Stark, and the truth of Robert's son. The moment stretched until Tyrion cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed, Your Grace? There is much to do." Jon rose again with relief. He descended from the throne, and they left the great hall. They gathered in the small council chamber. Jon, Tyrion, Robb, Lady Catelyn, Maester Aemon, Howland Reed, and a few others, among them Brynden Blackfish Tully, who had come at Robb's side. The chamber had once been the stage for the secret plots of Varys, Baelish, and the late Tywin. Now it felt oddly bare, though the painted table was cluttered with remnants of old battle plans and half-burned documents. The air smelled of old parchment and dust. Jon sat at the head of the table, resisting the urge to rub at his temples. Tyrion took a seat to his left, Robb to his right. The others arranged themselves quietly. Maester Aemon rested both hands on the table's edge, listening intently. "We have many issues," Jon began, "but I want to start with two: the question of Joffrey's trial and the realm's readiness for winter, specifically, food stores and defenses along the wall." Tyrion steepled his fingers. "Regarding the trial, we'll need a panel of judges. For a king's trial, typically the hand might preside, but in this case, I am a Lannister and my father was among Joffrey's supporters. That might cast suspicion on the verdict. If you, Your Grace, preside, some might see it as prejudiced, since Joffrey had your father, Eddard Stark, executed." Robb's face darkened at the mention of Ned's death. Jon nodded grimly. "True. What do you suggest?" Tyrion glanced around. "We might invite 3 or 5 judges of unimpeachable honor, Ser Brynden Tully, Lord Howland Reed, perhaps a prominent Tyrell lord who has no personal grudge, or a Baratheon supporter from the Stormlands who can remain impartial. The High Septon might also demand a presence." Lady Catelyn exhaled. "If the trial is fair, Joffrey's guilt is plain enough. The The realm knows he gave the order to behead Ned. He tortured Sansa, threatened countless lords, and allowed atrocities during the war. Once it's laid out, no judge could declare him innocent. Unless fear or bribery sways them, Brynden Tully muttered. But at this point, who would stand to gain by saving Joffrey? No one answered. Even the Lannister bannermen had turned from Joffrey, seeing him as a liability. Jon said, "Then let us form a tribunal of 5. Ser Brynden Tully, Lord Howland Reed, a representative from House Tyrell, Willis Tyrell if he agrees, and possibly Davos Seaworth if we can find him." That last name drew curious glances. Tyrion's eyebrows rose. The Onion Knight? Stannis's man? Yes, Jon said. I recall hearing of Davos. He was a smuggler but honest by all accounts and fiercely loyal to Stannis. Stannis was Robert's brother, so I trust Davos might be impartial regarding Joffrey's Lannister claim. If he can be located, well, we'll see. Robb folded his arms. Very well, that's 4. And the 5th? Jon glanced at Maester Aemon. Perhaps the High Septon to appease the faith, though I'd prefer not to let him overshadow the proceedings. If that's acceptable, we'll proceed. Let Joffrey's guilt be proven. If he has defenders who wish to speak on his behalf, we'll allow it. Everyone nodded, though some more reluctantly than others. Tyrion made a note on a scrap of parchment. We'll convene in a fortnight if we can gather them all. Meanwhile, Joffrey remains in a cell, and I'll see to it that he's kept under guard day and night. Jon shifted in his seat. Next, the White Walkers. Robb, you know what I saw beyond the wall. When I was still in the Night's Watch, we fought Whites. Corpses that moved and killed. The threat is real. Winter is nearing, and I fear the worst is yet to come. Robb nodded gravely. You have my support, but how do we convince the rest of the realm? Most lords here scoff at the idea of ice demons and living dead. They worry about bandits, raiders, or the last scraps of Lannister loyalists, not mythical creatures. Jon looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. We must send an urgent call to every corner of the 7 kingdoms. Let them know the true war is coming. We must replenish the Night's Watch. We must gather dragonglass, as it's known to be deadly to the others. We must also ensure that, if or when the wall is overrun, we can muster an army large enough to repel them. Tyrion sighed. Convincing these lords to send men north, especially after so many have died in the war, will not be easy, Your Grace. Perhaps you can start by sending ravens. Or you could invite the Lord Commander of the Watch to King's Landing for an audience, so he can describe the danger firsthand. Jon brightened. Yes, that's a good idea. Lord Commander Mormont, if he still lives, can testify to what we faced on the Fist of the First Men or beyond. And Sam Tarly, my friend, if Sam is still with him, can confirm what we saw at Craster's Keep. People might believe a maester in training. Aemon's brow furrowed. You are wise, Your Grace, to bring the Watch's testimony. As a former brother of the Watch myself, I can only lend my voice in support. But we must be swift. The cold winds will not wait. Already, the nights grow longer. They discussed logistics. A large part of the realm's harvest needed to be stored for winter, but the war had ravaged farmland. The riverlands were burned and pillaged in places, the westerlands faced internal strife, and the crownlands had endured siege. The Reach, seat of House Tyrell, still had some of the richest fields, but Tyrell's support was far from guaranteed without negotiated terms. At length, they concluded that Tyrion would draft letters in the king's name, urging each region to send a portion of its harvest and men to bolster the Watch. Robb and Jon would see about traveling north themselves before the worst of winter set in. The impetus behind all these moves was the dire threat of the White Walkers, though half the small council suspected they would have to fight disbelief more fiercely than any other foe. Once that matter was settled, the discussion turned to the scattered remains of House Lannister's power. With Tywin dead, Kevan Lannister might step forward, or other kin. Tyrion had never been close to Kevan, but he suggested sending an envoy to Lannisport to keep the West pacified. Tyrion himself might go, if necessary, or dispatch a trusted figure. Then came the Iron Islands. Word reached them that Balon Greyjoy had died. Perhaps he fell from a bridge during a storm, or perhaps something more sinister had occurred. Euron Greyjoy, Balon's brother, was rumored to have taken power, though Yara, Asha in the books, but Yara in the show, Greyjoy contested that claim. The Ironborn remained a threat to the coasts if they saw an opportunity for raiding. Jon wanted peace with the Iron Islands if possible. Another front of war would sap resources better used against the White Walkers. Lastly, they discussed House Martell in Dorne. The Martells had never forgiven the Lannisters for the deaths of Elia Martell and her children at the sack of King's Landing. But now that a new king ruled, could the Martells be persuaded to rejoin the realm wholeheartedly? Possibly. Dorne was far away, but its strength was significant. They would need that strength if the White Walkers ever marched south. By the time the meeting ended, the sun had passed its zenith, and the entire group felt the toll of so many looming issues. The realm might look stable on paper, the Lannisters effectively toppled, a new king crowned, but in reality it was a nest of hornets, each region nursing old wounds and new grudges. Jon dismissed the council. As the others departed in groups, he stayed a moment longer with Robb, watching Lady Catelyn speak quietly to the Blackfish near the door. Maester Aemon was led away by a serving man. Tyrion lingered a short distance off, lost in thought. "Brother," Robb said softly, turning to Jon, "I never dreamed we would be here, in King's Landing, you a king and me. Well, I was called king in the north, but now I stand at your side as a sworn ally. It's strange to me still. Father used to say we'd never want to come south." Jon recalled Ned's warnings. He said the south was full of snakes and plots. He was right. Robb's gaze shifted to the open window. "In the quiet hours, I think about Father. I wonder if he'd have approved, or if we're forging a path he'd have dreaded." Jon placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. "I think he'd be proud to see us united, with the realm no longer in a Lannister grip. And I think he'd understand why we're focusing on the threat from beyond the wall." A ghost of a smile crossed Robb's face. "Aye, maybe so. Well, I'll remain a while longer to help secure the city, but soon I must return north. Winterfell needs rebuilding, and our men want to see their families. The war took so many." Jon nodded, mindful of the heartbreak the North had endured. "Go when you must. I'll come to Winterfell before winter's end, if the roads remain passable. And if you need me, send word." They clasped arms, a silent oath. The next few days were a whirlwind. Tyrion dove into his new duties, reorganizing the city watch, sending directives to various lords, and quietly investigating rumors of leftover Lannister plots. One rumor claimed Cersei had arranged secret caches of wildfire around the city to be used if she faced defeat. Another rumor said she possessed certain letters that might blackmail High Lords. Jon ordered thorough sweeps of the Red Keep, but no wildfire stashes were found. Nonetheless, a faint sense of paranoia lingered. Cersei herself remained imprisoned, raving at her jailers. She demanded to see Jaime or Kevin, but neither could be found. Jaime was rumored to be somewhere in the Riverlands, possibly heading to Casterly Rock. Kevin had vanished into the west to secure his holdings. With no one to champion her cause, Cersei stewed in her cell, screaming threats of revenge. Jon heard that she refused to eat the bland prison fare, demanding better accommodations. The guards, on Tyrion's orders, refused her demands, though they made sure she didn't starve. Meanwhile, Joffrey huddled in his own separate cell, in the deepest dungeons beneath the Red Keep. He had, apparently, taken ill, feverish, shaking, sometimes babbling with fear. The jailer reported that Joffrey woke at night, screaming that wolves were tearing him apart. Jon, hearing this, felt little pity. He remembered Sansa's stories of Joffrey's cruelty, the way he forced her to look at her father's head on a spike. Still, he gave instructions for a maester to see to the boy. He had declared there would be a fair trial, and that meant keeping Joffrey alive until then. On a brighter note, the city itself began to recover. With the Tyrells now allied to the new regime, supplies flowed in from the Reach. Bread was distributed to the starving. Tyrion implemented certain policies, such as capping the prices that bakers could charge, at least for a time, which eased tensions in Flea Bottom. The gold cloaks patrolled regularly, stamping out the worst of the looting. Slowly, the small folks' fear receded, replaced by cautious hope. They had a new king who didn't appear to delight in cruelty. At least for now, that was enough to quell riots. The day before Joffrey's trial was set to begin, the High Septon and Willis Tyrell arrived. Willis, the eldest son of Mace Tyrell, was known for his intelligence and calmer temperament compared to his brash younger siblings. He rode into the city with a modest retinue and was received by Tyrion, who greeted him with careful politeness. Willis's courtesy was impeccable, though he seemed to scrutinize every aspect of King's Landing, from the watch on the gates to the state of the starving refugees. That afternoon, he met Jon in the solar near the royal apartments. Jon found Willis Tyrell seated at a window, gazing across the rooftops. Willis had a slight limp from an old injury, and he wore the rose sigil of House Tyrell on a fine green doublet. He rose with effort when Jon entered, bowing. "Your Grace," he said, voice soft but firm. "Thank you for granting me audience." Jon inclined his head. "I'm glad you've come, Lord Willis. Your presence on the tribunal is important. Joffrey's crimes touched many across the realm, but your house was once allied to his. There can be no question of partiality if you judge him fairly." Willis settled again, massaging his knee. "My father once supported Joffrey because he believed it was in the best interest of Highgarden and the Reach. That was a misjudgment, to say the least. But the fault lies not only with Mace Tyrell. The entire realm was in chaos, and alliances were shifting by the day. I have no personal love for Joffrey or the Lannisters, nor do I bear them undue hatred, only a sense that we must right what is wrong." Jon took a seat opposite him. "Then we share that goal. After the trial, I mean to unify the realm as best I can. But I won't conceal from you that I fear a far more dangerous threat than any Lannister claimant. If you haven't heard already, I speak of the White Walkers beyond the wall." Willis's brows drew together. "I have heard rumors. Unquiet dead, monstrous ice creatures, the collapse of the Watch. Most of my father's court dismiss it as the usual nonsense. But I have read certain histories. Old accounts speak of the Long Night, the others the Children of the Forest. My maester once told me that such threats may have been real, though so ancient as to be nearly forgotten. If you say they are stirring again, I am prepared to believe it. But I worry whether the Southern Lords will do the same." Jon felt relief that Willis did not scoff. "I appreciate your openness. The Tyrells hold great influence. If you speak in my support on the matter, it will help sway other lords to prepare." Willis nodded. "I will do what I can. My father is cautious, but if I present him with solid proof, he might commit men or supplies. The Reach can feed the realm, but only if we are certain we're not throwing resources away on illusions." "No offense, Your Grace." "None taken," Jon said. "I understand the skepticism, yet I'm certain the threat is real. We'll have proof soon enough, one way or another. I only hope we're ready." They spoke a while longer about the trial and about the future alliance between the Crown and Highgarden. Willis seemed genuinely eager to repair the damage done by the war. He mentioned Margaery Tyrell. She had once been betrothed to Joffrey, then to Renly Baratheon, but now lingered in limbo. A fleeting thought crossed Jon's mind that some might propose he wed Margaery to seal the Tyrell alliance. It was the sort of political match that lords loved. Yet Jon found the thought unsettling. Not that Margaery was unappealing, but he hardly knew her. Moreover, he had a realm to secure, a war with the others to worry about, and personal doubts about whether he was fit for marriage at all. When their discussion ended, Willis bowed once more and departed with an air of quiet resolution. Jon watched him go, hoping that the measured calm of Willis Tyrell might temper Mace Tyrell's brashness. House Tyrell's might was key to feeding the realm. Losing that alliance would be disastrous. The day of the trial dawned under a heavy sky, clouds rolling in from the sea. Thunder rumbled in the distance, hinting at the possibility of a storm. The throne room had been arranged with a raised platform for the judges and a smaller dais for the accused. Armed gold cloaks stood at attention, along with some northern guards to ensure no meddling from hidden Lannister loyalists. A hush filled the hall as the crowd gathered. This trial was open, and many curious citizens and noblemen had come to witness the downfall of the boy who once called himself king. Jon had decided not to preside in an official capacity. Rather, he would observe from a seat near the dais. The 5 judges were arranged in a semicircle. Ser Brynden Tully, stern and grim. Lord Howland Reed, watchful as ever. Willis Tyrell, calm and composed. The High Septon, resplendent in his robes, and Davos Seaworth, who had arrived only 2 days prior, summoned by raven and word of mouth. The Onion Knight looked somewhat overwhelmed by the pomp of King's Landing, but he had accepted the role out of respect for the memory of Stannis and for the promise of justice. At the appointed hour, Joffrey Baratheon was led into the hall. He appeared gaunt, eyes sunken from lack of sleep or illness. Chains bound his wrists, and a ragged tunic replaced his once fine attire. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Some jeered, others stared with morbid fascination. Joffrey glared wildly at the crowd, but his bravado was gone. His gaze swept the judges, then found Jon and turned hateful. A herald stepped forward, reciting a formal introduction. "We gather this day to try Joffrey Baratheon, styling himself King Joffrey of the houses Baratheon and Lannister, on charges of regicide, murder, treason, and crimes against the realm." The charges were numerous, spelled out in detail. The murder of Eddard Stark, the torture of Sansa Stark, the brutal treatment of small folk, the incitement of war under false pretenses of legitimacy, and so forth. Joffrey snarled at the mention of Ned Stark's name. He tried to speak, but the herald continued. When it was done, the High Septon nodded to Joffrey. "You may speak in your defense, or name a champion to speak for you." Joffrey licked his chapped lips, eyes darting around. I am the king," he shrilled. "You have no right to judge me. My father was King Robert. I sat the Iron Throne. You're all traitors. My mother will." "Enough," Brynden Tully cut in, his gravelly voice echoing. "We have proof that Robert Baratheon was not your father. Do you deny the incest between the Queen and her brother Jaime Lannister?" Joffrey spluttered. "Lies. All lies. I am a Baratheon. Robert, But the words died in his throat as Willis Tyrell rose, a document in hand, bearing testimonies. The crowd shifted. One by one, witnesses were called. Lords attested to Joffrey's open boastfulness about cruelty. Sansa Stark, her presence was uncertain until this moment, stepped forward, trembling but resolute. She spoke of her father's execution, forced by Joffrey's decree, of the way he had her beaten, threatened, and humiliated. Sansa's voice was halting at first, but grew steadier as she recounted the horrors. The hall listened in tense silence. Joffrey tried to interrupt, but a gold cloak placed a hand on his shoulder, silencing him. Then came a letter from the late Ned Stark, seized by Varys at one time, apparently detailing his discovery of Joffrey's true parentage. Tyrion produced the letter. The High Septon read it aloud. Ned Stark had written to Stannis, revealing that Joffrey was no true Baratheon. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The letter ended with Ned's intention to inform Robert upon his return from the hunt. But Robert never returned. He died soon after, under suspicious circumstances that implicated Cersei's hand. Joffrey, white-faced, stammered, "This is a forgery. I am the rightful king. My mother told me." Ser Brynden Tully leaned forward, his hawkish face grim. "Your mother told you many things. She is not here to defend you now, is she?" "She's in a cell, I heard," Lord Howland Reed said softly, "awaiting her own judgment. The realm is done with Lannister lies." Joffrey tried to lash out verbally, but the weight of the evidence was staggering. The recollections of multiple lords and ladies, Ned Stark's letter, plus the known rumors that Jaime Lannister was the father of Cersei's children. The High Septon added his condemnation, calling it an abomination before the gods. Finally, Davos Seaworth spoke. He was not a lord of high birth, but his words rang with sincerity. "I served King Stannis, who believed Joffrey to be falseborn. Stannis, for all his faults, was a man of stern truth. He would not have raised banners against a rightful king. I never met Joffrey personally, but I've seen enough evidence to know he is no Baratheon. The realm has suffered enough. Let justice be done." No champion stepped forward to defend Joffrey. Indeed, none dared. Even if the boy had once been king, no swords would leap to his side now. The High Septon, looking uneasy, conferred with the other judges. Their deliberation was short. They returned to their seats. Ser Brynden Tully rose again. "Joffrey Baratheon, the tribunal finds you guilty on all counts. You are hereby stripped of any claim to the throne, and you stand condemned for the murder of Eddard Stark and other crimes." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Your sentence is death." A hush, punctuated by a sharp intake of breath from many onlookers. Joffrey let out a small whimper, eyes darting from face to face. He jerked forward, chains rattling. "No, you can't. I'm the—" Davos Seaworth lifted a hand. "The tribunal has spoken." Joffrey turned wild, pulling against his guards, shrieking, "Mother! Mother! Help me! I'll kill you all, my father will." But the guards wrestled him back. The crowd watched with a mix of revulsion and grim satisfaction. There was little pity to be found. Jon, who had remained silent through the proceedings, finally stood. He locked eyes on the boy who had taken Ned's head. No, not a boy, some monstrous creature grown from incest and cruelty. Yet in that moment, Joffrey looked pathetic, lost, pitiful. Jon felt no triumph, only a sad inevitability. "My lords," Jon said quietly, addressing the tribunal, "if it pleases you, I would see Joffrey executed at dawn, as is fitting for a king's justice. But in honor of Ned Stark, who believed in mercy, let it be quick and clean. No torment." The crowd stirred. Perhaps some had wanted a more brutal end for the boy who had inflicted so much suffering. But Jon would not stoop to that level. He would not take delight in cruelty. A hush of acceptance fell, broken only by Joffrey's ragged sobs. The trial ended with that pronouncement. Joffrey was dragged away, and the hall emptied in a hush of finality. Sansa lingered, trembling, unsure whether to feel relief or horror. Lady Catelyn embraced her daughter, tears shining in her eyes. At least one part of Ned Stark's tragedy would see closure, though no execution could ever bring Ned back. In the aftermath, Jon withdrew to his solar. He tried to quell the roiling inside him. Justice had been served, but it tasted bitter. He thought of the old words, "When you cut off a man's head, you kill not only his crimes, but his chance of redemption." Yet Joffrey had shown no remorse. Likely he was too broken by cruelty to ever change. Tyrion found Jon staring at the drawn curtains, the sky outside heavy with storm clouds. "It's done," Tyrion said, voice subdued. "Tomorrow the boy dies." Jon nodded. "It had to be done, but I can't pretend it gives me comfort." Tyrion took a seat, folding his hands. "The city will breathe easier with him gone, though I doubt your troubles end here. Cersei remains. Your wars remain. The White Walkers remain." Jon exhaled. "I know, but for now, at least justice is done for Ned Stark." He paused, glancing at Tyrion. "What of Sansa? She was wed to you, was she not?" Tyrion's expression became guarded. "We were forced to marry under Tywin's scheme. I assure you it was never consummated. I have told Sansa repeatedly that if she wishes an annulment, I will grant it. She need only say the word." Jon studied him. "Do you think she will? If she's wise, she will. She's a highborn lady who endured horrors here. She deserves a chance at a true match, or at least a life away from Lannister entanglements." Tyrion's voice held a note of genuine regret. "I won't hold her to a sham marriage. I suspect she'll want to go north with her family as soon as possible." Jon nodded. "Thank you, Tyrion. That is gracious. I'll speak to Sansa myself, see what she wants. Perhaps she'll travel with Robb." Tyrion shrugged. "She may still fear the city. I wouldn't blame her. In any case, if you need me, I'll be reorganizing the City Watch. We've had rumors of resurgent crime in Flea Bottom. The moment the people sense a power vacuum, they revert to lawlessness." Jon gave a faint, humorless smile. "Thank you, Hand. Keep me apprised." Tyrion departed, leaving Jon alone with his thoughts. At dawn, rain pelted the courtyard of the Red Keep, a cold, steady downpour that soaked cloaks and slicked the stone. The rising sun was hidden behind dense clouds. Nonetheless, a gathering formed in that courtyard: gold cloaks, stark men, a few lords, and the official headsman. Joffrey was brought forth in chains. He was shivering, whether from cold or terror or fever, it was impossible to say. The boy's face was contorted in defiance, but the raw fear beneath was plain to all. Jon watched from under an awning, arms folded. Ghost stood beside him, the rain trickling off the direwolf's white fur. Sansa had chosen not to attend. Robb and Lady Catelyn stood a few steps behind Jon, both grim. Tyrion was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he had no wish to watch his nephew die. The headsman, a tall man with hooded features, hefted a great sword. Joffrey's chains clanked. A hush fell over the courtyard. Thunder rumbled overhead. The headsman looked to Jon for a signal. Jon gave a single nod, lips pressed tight. Joffrey wailed, cursing all of them. "I'll come back as a ghost. You'll all burn. My mother will." His rant ended in a choking sob. A single stroke of the sword. The blade fell. The crowd flinched as Joffrey's head rolled, blood spattering the wet stones. His body crumpled, lifeless. The deed was done. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of rain. Then a subdued murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some turned away, shaken by the finality. Others looked relieved. Robb exhaled softly, bowing his head. Lady Catelyn closed her eyes, lips moving in silent prayer to the old gods. Jon felt no triumph, only a numb sense of inevitability. Joffrey's reign had ended the day the city fell, yet only now was the final page written. The boy who had once sat on the Iron Throne, who had commanded men far older than himself, who had cruelly toyed with lives. He was gone, undone by the truth of his birth and the weight of his crimes. Jon studied the blood pooling on the stone, mixed with rainwater. The color leached away, swirling into the drain. A life ended, an era ended. He turned, stepping back inside, ghost at his heel. No one spoke to him as he passed. The tension in the air lingered, but some wave of collective relief swept the courtyard. Perhaps the city would be safer without the looming specter of Joffrey's possible return. Perhaps the realm could now move forward. Jon returned to the great hall, removing his soaked cloak. The storm raged outside. He took a seat on the Iron Throne, feeling more wearied than ever by kingship. Within minutes, the day's supplicants and concerns would begin. Lords petitioning for lands, disputes about supply shipments, rumors of the Greyjoys raiding somewhere up the coast. The wheel of governance never stopped turning. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the clang of distant bells and the patter of rain fill his ears. He thought of Ned Stark's words about justice. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Jon had not swung the sword himself, but in that moment he almost wished he had. Perhaps it would have been more honorable to do so, as Ned once taught. Yet the city needed to see the headsman's blade, a symbol that the crown's laws had done their work. No matter, the deed was done. Joffrey was gone. In the weeks following Joffrey's execution, King's Landing settled into a cautious peace. Messengers arrived from across the realm, some bearing pledges of fealty to Jon Baratheon, others full of questions. In the west, Kevan Lannister had taken Casterly Rock, though rumors suggested Jaime might also be lurking in the shadows. Kevan's letter was polite, if chilly, acknowledging Jon's reign but requesting leniency for the Lannister name. In the north, the reconstruction of Winterfell had begun in earnest, with Robb overseeing the efforts. Sansa traveled with her mother and the Blackfish back to Riverrun first, intending to gather her strength before eventually moving to Winterfell. Tyrion, upon receiving Sansa's request for annulment, promptly granted it, letting her go with no fuss. She departed the city with her head high, a quiet sense of resolve shining in her eyes. Jon and Robb both promised her that someday, the wrongs done to House Stark would be avenged in full, though Joffrey's execution had already cast a measure of justice for Ned. Cersei, meanwhile, faced her own trial, but her case was more tangled. She stood accused of regicide against Robert, incest, conspiracy in Ned Stark's death, and countless other charges. Some evidence was circumstantial, and she cunningly denied everything, claiming she was forced by men like Littlefinger or Varys. Without Joffrey's direct condemnation of his mother, much was left in doubt. Even so, her incest with Jaime was widely believed, and many in the city despised her. Day by day, the question loomed. Would Jon show her mercy, or condemn her as he had Joffrey? In the end, after a protracted hearing, the tribunal found Cersei guilty of incest and conspiracy, though her role in Robert's death was not proven beyond doubt. Her sentence was imprisonment for life, a decision influenced by Jon's desire not to stoke further divisions by executing every Lannister. She was sent to the Silent Sisters' cloister outside the city, a humiliating fate for a proud woman. Some said she went mad with rage behind those walls, cursing Jon's name. Others said she spent her days plotting vengeance. Regardless, she was no longer a threat in King's Landing. As the crown stabilized, new challenges arose. The Ironborn indeed tested the coasts of the Reach, raiding small villages. Euron Greyjoy declared himself king of the Isles and the North, vowing to take advantage of the war-weary realm. Jon ordered a fleet assembled under Davos Seaworth's guidance. An odd choice, given Davos was no admiral, but few men commanded as much trust. The plan was to sail north around the Cape of Wrath, heading off any Ironborn reavers. Tyrion, for his part, navigated the labyrinth of royal finances. The crown's debts were staggering, owed mostly to the Iron Bank of Bravos. Jon authorized negotiations to restructure those debts, mindful that a war with the White Walkers would require every coin. The realm needed a stable economy, or it would crumble from within. Amid these practical matters, a subtle excitement laced the air. Talk of Daenerys Targaryen, alive across the narrow sea, apparently gathering followers. Whispers said she had dragons, the first in centuries. If true, it meant an old, formidable power might yet return to Westeros. Some lords wondered if Jon's claim would stand unchallenged by a Targaryen. Others whispered that Daenerys might ally with Jon, if he offered her something. Perhaps a marriage or half the realm. But such talk remained rumor. Jon had no time or desire to chase foreign queens while the realm's urgent needs pressed at him daily. Months bled into a precarious routine. The nights lengthened. The wind off the narrow sea turned bitter. Flocks of ravens arrived bearing messages of early snow in the north, of a gathering gloom beyond the wall. Jon made preparations to travel north before the roads were impassable. He needed to see the situation firsthand, to meet with the Night's Watch and confirm the state of their defenses. Tyrion would remain behind to govern King's Landing in his stead, with Willis Tyrell and Davos Seaworth assisting. The morning of Jon's departure came, gray clouds overhead. He dressed in warm leathers and furs, reminiscent of his old life. He strapped Longclaw at his hip. Ghost would accompany him, of course, along with a small retinue of loyal men. As he left the Red Keep, the City Watch saluted him. The small folk watched him pass with curiosity, some bowing, some simply staring. They saw in him a king different from the ones they knew, neither golden-haired nor black of heart, but a quiet, earnest man wearing the Stark look. He rode through the city gates, feeling the chill in the air, remembering how once he believed he'd never leave the wall, never be anything but a bastard of uncertain parentage. How the world had changed. With Ghost padding at his side, Jon led his party onto the King's Road, heading north. The wheels of their wagons creaked under the weight of supplies. White ravens from the Citadel had declared that winter was officially here, if not yet fully settled. The snows would come soon enough. Days passed in a steady march. The Riverlands, once scorched by war, showed signs of slow recovery. Villagers offered what they could to the king who had ended Lannister rule. Jon accepted their humble welcomes with quiet gratitude, urging them to stockpile grain for the coming cold. At Riverrun, he found Lady Catelyn and Sansa. Arya was still missing, though rumors placed her somewhere in the Riverlands under the protection of unknown allies. Sansa greeted Jon warmly, looking more composed than ever, though an undercurrent of sadness lingered in her eyes. She spoke of the harrowing memories King's Landing held for her, but she also expressed relief that Joffrey was gone. Jon spent a few nights at Riverrun, conferring with the Blackfish about any Lannister retaliation. Though Kevan Lannister remained in the West, he seemed focused on consolidating, not waging fresh war. Good. The realm had bled enough. Then Jon continued onward, bidding farewell to Sansa. She chose to remain at Riverrun for the winter. Lady Catelyn, torn between her children, decided to stay with Sansa a while longer. Further north, the King's Road wound through territory once ravaged by the Mountain's men. Now, charred farmhouses dotted the landscape, a grim reminder of the war. Jon's party trudged on. The weather turned colder, biting wind stinging their faces. Ghost seemed in his element, bounding ahead, ears perked. Eventually, they reached Moat Cailin, the gateway to the north. The ruin was manned by loyal Stark men, who saluted Jon eagerly. He pressed on, mindful of each day's dwindling light, wanting to reach Winterfell before the snows made travel impossible. At night, he slept in drafty keeps or rough camps, haunted by half-remembered dreams of the Wall, the silent ranks of the dead, and an army of ice. When at last the gray walls of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, Jon felt a clench in his chest. Smoke rose from repaired chimneys. Robb had made progress restoring the keep after the ruin left by Theon Greyjoy's occupation. The battered gates stood open, revealing the courtyard where once Jon had trained with his siblings. A swirl of memories assailed him. The laughter of Arya, the quiet concern of Bran, the stern watchfulness of Ned. Ghost padded beside him, as if sensing the significance of this return. Inside, the courtyard bustled with activity. Workers piling timber, hammering new boards onto the roofs. Northern soldiers practiced with spears. Robb Stark emerged from within, a look of relief on his face. He strode to Jon, clasping forearms with a grin. "You made it before the worst of the snow. Welcome home, Your Grace." Jon embraced his brother, ignoring titles. "It's good to see you." He glanced around, noticing that the familiar corridors and towers still bore scars of the past. But the sight of it all, the old oak in the courtyard, the stone steps to the great hall, filled him with a warmth deeper than any fire could provide. For a moment, he was just Jon Snow again, returning to the place he grew up. That evening, they feasted in the great hall, though it was a modest affair. Stores of food were carefully hoarded for the winter. Still, hot bread and mead reminded Jon of simpler times. They spoke at length about the fortress repairs, the state of the north, the whereabouts of certain houses. The Boltons, surprisingly, had not shown their typical cunning. Roose Bolton had retreated to the Dreadfort, maintaining a grudging loyalty to Robb and Jon. No one trusted him fully, but so far, he had caused no overt trouble. Jon thanked Robb for his efforts, but soon the conversation turned to the Night's Watch. Reports said wildlings had gathered beyond the wall, led by Mance Rayder, rumored king beyond the wall. More troubling, sightings of whites had increased. The watch was severely undermanned, with only a handful of rangers to patrol hundreds of miles of frosted wilderness. Lord Commander Mormont still held Castle Black, but he was aging, and the strain of leadership weighed heavily. Winterfell's great hall dimmed as torches burned low. The Stark bannermen took their leave, some staggering with drink, others quietly retiring. Eventually, Jon and Robb were left at the high table, sharing a final cup of ale. Ghost dozed at Jon's feet, gray wind at Robb's side. Outside, a chill wind howled against the walls. Robb's gaze flickered with concern. "You mean to ride to the wall, don't you?" "Yes," Jon said. "In a day or two once I've rested. You're welcome to come, but I'll understand if you need to remain here to govern the north." Robb drummed his fingers on the table. "I want to see what you've seen, face the White Walkers if they are truly out there. But the North does need a Stark in Winterfell. You are as much a Stark as I am, but the people look to me now. Perhaps I can spare a small retinue to accompany you. I'd feel better knowing you're not riding into that frozen land alone." Jon inclined his head. Thank you. A small retinue is all I need. I have some men from King's Landing, but I'd prefer Northmen who know the cold. We'll confer with Mormont and see what must be done." They shared a solemn nod, each aware that the real test lay ahead. The realm might be quiet for a season, but if the White Walkers attacked, no city or keep would be safe. All their power struggles, all the coronations and trials, would mean nothing if the dead rose in unstoppable numbers. That night, Jon slept in a chamber near the old library tower, a place that once had been used for lesser guests. He found himself awake in the darkness, listening to the faint moan of the wind. His mind wandered to the vow he had taken as a member of the Night's Watch, sworn to guard the realms of men. He had abandoned that vow for a greater purpose, so he told himself, but in his heart he felt the same sense of duty. He was still a watcher on the walls, in spirit if not in oath. The Iron Throne was a mantle he'd accepted out of necessity, but the war for the Dawn was the fight he was born for. Eventually, dawn came, pale light creeping through the shutters. Snow drifted in lazy spirals across Winterfell's courtyard. Jon rose, dressed in warmer garb, and descended to break his fast with Robb. They planned details for the journey to Castle Black. 10 good men would join Jon, stalwart Northmen who had fought under Robb, plus a few skilled archers. Jon would bring Ghost, of course, and a wagon loaded with dragonglass daggers he had acquired from Dragonstone's old stores. By midday, the small group assembled in the courtyard, horses saddled and cloaks drawn tight. Robb stood by to bid them farewell. He grasped Jon's forearm one last time. "Send word as soon as you can. If the threat is as real as you fear, I'll march every man able to wield a sword to the wall, come spring or come the deepest winter." Jon nodded, eyes earnest. "If it comes to that, do not delay. We'll need the north and all the realm besides." "Thank you, brother." He mounted his horse, with Ghost bounding alongside. The wind carried a faint bite, and the sky overhead was a flat gray. The gates of Winterfell creaked open, letting Jon and his retinue pass onto the King's Road. It felt strange to ride away from the seat of House Stark, but if life had taught Jon anything, it was that duty rarely allowed one to stay in one place. They traveled north at a slow but steady pace. Snow deepened day by day, making progress more difficult. They saw fewer travelers. Those who did pass often recognized Jon, bowing or exclaiming that the king had come to share their burdens. He simply urged them to stay safe, stockpile food, and send ravens if the White Walkers appeared. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Others, with wide eyes, promised to keep watch. After more days of relentless cold, the wall finally loomed into view, rising like an impossible barrier of ice against the horizon. The closer they got, the more Jon felt a pang of memory. Castle Black came into sight, a fortress of black wooden towers and buildings huddled at the base of the wall, overshadowed by that colossal rampart of ancient ice. Smoke rose from the chimneys, though far less than Jon remembered. The watch's numbers had dwindled. Men on the walls spotted the approaching party and sounded a horn, echoing off the ice. Ghost lifted his muzzle, letting out a deep, low howl. Jon felt that old sense of belonging, tinged with sorrow for the oath he'd once sworn and then forsaken. But the men at the gates welcomed him warmly. "King Jon," they said, voices awed or uncertain. "We never expected to see you here again." Jon dismounted, passing his reins to one of Robb's men. "Is Lord Commander Mormont here?" he asked. A brother nodded. "Aye, in the common hall. He'll be eager to see you." Jon led Ghost inside the courtyard, where everything looked smaller than he remembered, a sign of how much he'd changed or how the watch had dwindled. Black brothers paused in their chores, gawking at the new king. Jon recognized some faces. PYP, Gren, both alive here, though he'd feared them lost. Sam was nowhere in sight. "PYP, Gren," Jon said, voice warm with relief. "You're here. It's good to see you alive." They grinned, rushing over, ignoring formalities. "Jon," PYP cried. "We never thought. Well, we heard rumors. They said you were king now, and you took King's Landing. Is it true?" Jon nodded with a rueful smile. It's true, though I wish it was as simple as it sounds. I'm here now because of the White Walkers. We have to prepare. Gren's eyes grew round. Aye, the Walkers. We've had a few run-ins. Lost some good men. The Lord Commander's been sending ravens, but half of them never get answered. Stannis came once, tried to help, but that ended poorly. Jon frowned. Stannis was here? Yes, after the battle at the wall. But, well, he's gone now. Some say he took men deeper north to fight Mance Rayder. Others say he died in the snow. It's uncertain. Gren scratched his head. Mormont can fill you in. He'll be thrilled to see you. We need every ally we can get. Jon felt a flicker of concern about Stannis's unknown fate, but pushed it aside. One crisis at a time, they made for the common hall, a smoky building where black brothers ate and sometimes gathered in the evening. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stew and damp wool. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont stood at the far side, stooped but still broad-shouldered, silver hair framing a hawk-like face. He turned as Jon entered, eyes widening, then a deep grin split his features. So it is true, Mormont rumbled. You've become a king, and yet you come back to us. Ha! I should have known. Ned Stark's blood runs deep. Jon bowed his head respectfully. Lord Commander, it's good to see you well. Mormont snorted. Well enough. We're short on men, short on supplies, but we keep vigil. You know as well as I that the White Walkers are out there. They killed some of our best rangers. We do what we can to hold the line, but winter is here, and they'll only grow bolder. Jon nodded, stepping closer. Ghost sniffed at Mormont's boots. Then Saturday, I've come to help. The realm belongs to a king who knows the truth of what's coming. I'll see if we can reinforce the wall, send more men, more food. But I need your accounts. I need details of every sighting, every attack. Mormont regarded him with a mix of pride and relief. You'll have it. Gods know the Night's Watch stands alone too often. But first come, sit, eat something hot. Then we can plan how to save the world from an army of the dead. Jon allowed himself a thin smile. Aye, that sounds fair. And so, in the flickering lamplight of Castle Black's common hall, King Jon Baratheon, once Jon Snow of the Night's Watch, bowed his head over a steaming bowl of stew, hearing Mormont's weary recounting of raids and wights, of a gathering horde in the far north. The men around them listened with solemn attention, some trembling at the memory of white attacks, others grim-faced as they recalled lost brothers. Jon sat there, the ring of the Iron Throne invisible in that moment, replaced by the old duty that had guided him from the start. Protect the realm. That vow, however twisted by circumstance, still beat in his heart. He had toppled Joffrey, ended the Lannister grip on King's Landing, and forged alliances across half a continent. Yet the real war lay ahead, in the frozen wastes beyond the wall, and he would meet it, not as a solitary steward of the Watch, but as a king determined to unite the living against the dead. Outside, the wind howled across the ice, and the sun slipped behind the horizon. In the gloom, the wall stood sentinel, an ancient bulwark against horrors too few believed in. But Jon believed. He had seen them. The final test of his kingship was coming, carried on the bitter winds of winter, and if the living failed to unite, even 1,000 kings and queens would not save Westeros from the long night. So he listened to Mormont's accounts, resolved that, come dawn, he would ascend the wall once more. He would look out over the endless snowy expanse, see the dark forest of the haunted forest, and remind himself of what was at stake. He had wrested the Iron Throne from a false king, only to realize that seat of power was little more than a stool made of melted swords compared to the inexorable onslaught of ice and death. The war for the dawn was the only war that truly mattered, and Jon was determined not to let the realm down. He thought of Ned Stark, Robert Baratheon, Lyanna Stark, all those who had shaped his life, whether through lies or truths. He closed his eyes, hearing the murmured voices in the hall, feeling Ghost's warmth at his side. The night pressed in, but a faint ember of hope glowed in his chest. He was not alone. He had Robb's loyalty, Tyrion's cunning, the Tyrell's might, and the quiet vow of lords across Westeros who had seen justice done. Perhaps that would be enough. Perhaps not. But Jon Snow, Jon Baratheon, would stand against the darkness, as every watchman must. And if fate demanded a king to lead the realm's final stand, then by the old gods and the new, he would be that king. The dawn must come, and he would fight for it with every breath, every ounce of blood in his veins, until winter's fury was spent and the living stood victorious once more.